Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now you've probably heard of the notorious Nvidia GeForce GT 710. First launched in January of 2016, it was ideal for those who wanted to add extra display ports to a basic PC, or maybe play a few low-spec games. You wouldn't think then, given its limited power, that we'd see it relaunched in 2020. This is the ASUS GT710 4H SL2GD5, and it came out just 6 months ago, so what's changed? Well, for starters, there are now 4 HDMI ports, so the card not only supports 4K resolution at 60Hz, but it can support up to 4 monitors at 2160p as well, albeit only at 30Hz. The PCI Express 2x1 slot also means that it's compatible with a lot more motherboards. This new version, however, does cost more than the older ones, which you can also find new in 2020. Here in the UK, this one sells for roughly £60 on average, which is only £2 less than the cheapest GT 1030, so anyone looking for a 60Hz single monitor experience should definitely get that instead. Of course, for businesses who want one of these for a basic multi-display setup, the price probably isn't that much of a concern. But now it's gaming time. Does this passively called no frills card put up a better fight than GT 710s of years gone by? Well, up against those awful DDR3 variants, yes, but remember, it's still not intended for intensive situations. I apologise for some of the clips today. The quality of them isn't that great because I needed to turn the resolution way down in order to achieve playable frame rates. Even then, the frame rates weren't always playable. Crysis Remastered started off okay, especially at the beginning of the game, during the opening parachute scene. I was trying to target 30 frames per second today wherever possible. As we moved down toward the beach, the frame rate slowly decreased and all the gameplay was recorded externally, so what you see here is exactly what you'll get. Stutters as well. Interestingly, while we're on the subject, the GT710 isn't supposed to support Nvidia's internal Shadowplay capture software, but I discovered that if you swap the card into a system with the Nvidia GeForce experience already installed and let Windows auto-detect your new card, then you can record using Shadowplay despite the option being missing from the GeForce experience program. The frame rate isn't usually affected with more powerful GPUs, but here is how Skyrim runs when recording internally compared to how it runs when recording externally with a capture card and another PC. We're losing about half of our frame rate, so recording internally with a 710 is not a good idea unless you really need something as a last resort. While we're on the subject of Skyrim, let's talk about how to get 30 FPS with the overhauled Special Edition. 720p low is the preset you want, and with that configured, it was time for another trip into town with the intention of going on yet another cabbage stealing escapade. As I strolled into Riverwood, I approached the cabbage cart with caution and discovered that these were apparently free, so I grabbed one and headed out. This didn't seem like much of a stress test for the GT710 though, so I turned around and walked back towards Sven, whose head had previously become acquainted with my axe in the previous video. With a swift blow to his skull, it was time to move on and face the wrath of the villagers. Skyrim is playable if you don't mind 30 FPS at 720p. Having played most of the original version back on PS3 years ago, I certainly don't mind 30 FPS at all. Moving on to another open world adventure now, and I often wonder what would be worse in real life than exploring a nuclear wasteland all alone. I then realised the answer to that would have to be exploring a nuclear wasteland all alone with super low textures. Seriously though, I love Fallout New Vegas. It's probably in my top 10 games of all time, and it will run on almost anything, but with the lowest settings it almost looks like a beta version of itself. It's still really fun and things still look fairly sharp as we haven't had to sacrifice the resolution for 60 FPS. There will be a few moments even at low whereby the frame times will be negatively affected, such as encountering those dust tornado things and venturing into busier settlements. For the most part though, it's very enjoyable and the frame rate dips aren't too bad at all. Thankfully, if low settings are too low for you, then medium is also doable, but you'll have to expect a few more dips here and there, and 10 or so so FPS less on average. Anti-aliasing was also off to ensure a smoother overall frame rate. Medium does look a lot better, and you could always combine a mixture of the two settings for a closer to 60 FPS average overall. Now, it's amazing how good The Witcher 3 looks even at low, as if the developers wanted to ensure that the overall feel and atmosphere of the title wasn't compromised even with lower end systems. Unfortunately, the GT 710 still didn't do very well, and we were seeing 17 FPS on average with the lowest settings. You may be wondering, does this improve in less populated areas? The answer to that would have to be not really. I made my way over to where I think some crops would usually be with a higher graphical preset in an attempt to claw back some performance. And while we were seeing the occasional improvement in this empty space, sometimes 20 FPS in fact, the experience didn't really feel much better. Put it this way, if the frame rate counter was missing, then you wouldn't be able to tell the difference gameplay wise. Now, to my surprise, Fortnite actually ran with at least 30 FPS at both 900p and 720p, and it hit around 20 with Full HD resolution. I stuck to 720p because we saw less drops here, though things still fell into the low 20s. Overall, I wasn't expecting this result, not after previous gameplay benchmarks, but it seems that Fortnite, at least this current version of the game, runs okay. I think the latest patch shrunk the size of the game overall and perhaps made a few optimizations to performance. I'm not too sure on that last part, but I've spoken to a couple of people who've seen better frame rates since the update and some who really haven't. It could also be the fog helping here, sort of like that distance fog that some old games used to have. In a competitive environment, this still won't be acceptable to a lot of people, but 30 FPS with a GT 710 should always be praised. Okay, if you're trying to play Red Dead Redemption with the new GT 710 at 720p, then you can expect to see around 9 FPS with the lowest preset. If, however, you decide to take it one step further and cut that resolution scaling in half, then you can expect 12. No, sorry, we'll call it 13 because it was actually 12.6, so we've got to round it up. There's no point spending too much time talking about this result, but I will say that I did see a few odd artifacts popping up occasionally on screen. I don't know if they'll be visible in the final cut, but it was as though a sort of checkered effect covered the entire scene. I think it has something to do with the AA being off, but I'm not entirely sure. MSI Afterburner, the software I use to record the frame rate, won't work with Forza Horizon 4, so I've enlarged the FPS counter in the corner. Luckily, the game offers a very low preset and a resolution of 1024x768, but it wasn't enough to make things playable. The frame rate also made driving really difficult, as you can see by my disastrous attempt at keeping my Escort Cosworth on the road. It's funny, I've lived in England all my life and always driven on the left, but as soon as I play a game, I'm always drawn to the right-hand side. It's probably because of all the Grand Theft Auto games I played as a child. I mean an 18+ adult. Honestly, Forza doesn't look too bad here, it just doesn't run very well in the slightest. Finally, for the GT 710, it's Rainbow Six Siege. With 1024x768 resolution, we were able to hit 30 FPS plus. I got the figures from the in-game benchmark test and played a bit of hostage protection for the footage. Along with the average, the 1 and 0.1% lows were pretty consistent, and you may have noticed that the card, while not getting too hot, hits about 65 degrees with the fanless cooler. I bring this up now because although these temperatures are fine, it rules out the possibility of any overclocking, though I'm tempted to stick my cheap CPU liquid cooler on here at some point and see what we can do. Check out the audacity of the enemy team here. I just had this wall plastered. Unbelievable. All in all, the new GT 710 really isn't any different from the old one, apart from the addition of 4K 60Hz support, which for some will be a blessing. Unless you need more than one of these though to run a few displays, you should definitely opt for a GT 1030 instead, the GDDR5 version, because yeah, the DDR4 version is not good. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.